So this is part two. It's got a more optimistic beat, hopefully. Part one was about the negative side of boxing, in my opinion, the cons, and I'm sure there'll be other things I can add to that, but those were the things I was thinking about at the time. So this is part two. This is covering the positive side, in my opinion. Firstly is a very obvious one, physical fitness. Boxing, like any sport, involves very intense training, and even if a fighter loses, assuming that he doesn't have very serious injuries, because quite often fights are on points and so on, casual sort of people who are critical of boxing might think that losses always come when some guy's brutally knocked out. In fact, that's relatively rare. Most fights, both guys are standing at the end, and anyway, whatever way you look at it, it's good for health insofar as fitness is concerned. Not so much in terms of maybe injuries you might sustain in the fight, but in terms of actually the process leading up to it, unquestionably it's good for fitness. In my training, apologies for bringing my own case into this yet again, but in my training I lost a full kilo in training, so it's just a good way to keep in shape. It's not universal. You get some boxers that don't particularly look after their conditioning, but most do. Most do, even at amateur level, because it's inevitable, you have to. So that's definitely a positive side. Self-challenge. Boxing is a very personal sport in the sense that whilst there are cornermen, there are trainers, there are managers and so on, fundamentally, in the end of the day, take away all the audience, the promoter, the trainer, the referee, everyone. It is one man facing another, or one woman facing another. In that sense, it is actually very fair. It's not like a team sport where you would have the bad behaviour of one player would then have an impact on the whole team. Boxing is very fair in the sense that it is one man against another, and the best man wins. Yes, I mentioned corruption in the last video, but I believe the situation is much better than it once was, and most decisions the fans don't have a problem with. So it is the ultimate test of testing yourself, physically, mentally. I can testify to that. I mean, this is a guy, I'm talking about myself here, who lost a fight, and who still says that it was a good experience. That's what boxing does. It makes you test yourself. And knowing that you've went into the ring is actually a very good feeling, even if you've lost, because you know that you've had the guts to do it. So that in itself is a good feeling. Yeah. Winning. Now, I haven't done it myself, obviously, but I have heard many fighters, trainers and so on say that having your arm raised in front of the crowd like that is one of the best highs that you can get, and I could very well believe that, especially at professional level. So to fulfill that sort of goal must be phenomenal. For me, boxing, and this could probably apply to other martial arts, but I'll just say boxing for now, no other sport can rival it except maybe Formula 1 or something like that. No other sport, in my opinion, rivals the sort of intensity, the sort of risk, the sort of adrenaline that boxing has. In fact, it's precisely because there are such risks that the adrenaline is so high. Now, with all due respect to golfers and tennis players and so on, I really don't think it has the same level of adrenaline. I guess for them it does, it's their passion, but they don't have risks. A tennis player doesn't go into a tennis match and think that he might get seriously injured. The only other sport outside boxing I can think that might be the case is Formula 1 or gymnastics and other martial arts, but the intensity, a lot of boxing critics say it's a brutal sport, but they need to understand it's precisely because it's brutal, because it's so on the edge, that guys want to do it. Do you really think that people do you think that boxers enjoy getting hit on the face? No, they don't. But what they do enjoy, and what is compelling, is that adrenaline. And unless you've done it, then you need to experience it to really understand why boxers think that way. No one wants to be hurt. No fighter actually enjoys being hurt. And I don't think that any fighter wants to hurt another man. I really don't think they do. But the adrenaline is phenomenal. Especially, I mean, when you have a fight like Froch Groves 2, 80,000 people, I can't comprehend that. I just can't comprehend that. And part of me sort of envies those guys for having been through that experience, yet at the same time has massive respect for them for doing it. So that adrenaline is unmatched in few other sports, in my opinion. I mean, I took part in a low-level amateur fight, and I can tell you the energy I felt was incredible. So, I mean, it was a very surreal atmosphere. I already mentioned this in the video specifically about that. But that is, I would call it a positive thing. I mean, in this world, in this life, you have to make life worth living. So, okay, there's risks involved, but what's better? Taking risks in a sporting event and getting that sort of adrenaline close to the edge, or basically just wasting your time and just doing something that has no productivity whatsoever and just being boring and not living. That's the way I see it. And it's precisely probably because there are risks so many guys want to do it. Not so many guys, actually. A select few. What else do I like? I like some of the, especially in professional boxing, some of the, let's say, glitz and show around it. I mean, when you have the round girl, when you have the national anthems, when you have the lead up to the fight, it's very, very energetic environment, and it is an event. In that sense, it's more than just a fight, it's an event. And to me, that's definitely a compelling aspect. History. Boxing has a history other martial arts can't really rival, insofar as even cultural aspects. Boxing has a profound cultural impact, especially in certain communities. In Irish communities, in Jewish communities, in African American communities, there's a real cultural aspect. And that is probably more positive than negative. I mean, how can you explain the fact that there's so many films made about boxing, even though it's not the most popular sport, and yet there's probably more films made about boxing than there are about football? I in fact, honestly, and this isn't just bias as a boxing fan, I think probably it's the sport that gets the most films made about it. There must be a reason for that. What else can I say? Preparation for the real world. Boxing teaches self-control. It teaches aggression management. In that sense, it is actually very good for troubled young men who may be otherwise involved in gangs. It sounds like a cliche, but this is a fact. So people can say, oh well, it's a violent sport, but would you rather have a troubled young man taking out his aggression in the ring, in a controlled environment, rather than potentially joining a gang and mugging old ladies? I think it goes without saying what is preferable. And it's unrealistic to say, oh well, he can get involved in other sports that aren't violent. That's unrealistic. So, in that sense, I do think boxing could be, even the former Home Secretary, David Blunkett, advocated it for precisely that reason. What else? I've covered a lot of things there. I think it's just compelling. It's an ultimate self-test of overcoming fear, not just physical, it's psychological as well. If you know that you could step in a boxing ring, you can sleep well. I mean, obviously there's different levels of boxing. I still want to test myself further, but this is a start. And I mentioned real world preparation. I'm not saying you can be like Bruce Lee in the street if you've had one boxing match, but what it does do is give you a sense of confidence. It does do that. That has to be a positive thing. So that, in my opinion, are some of the positive aspects of boxing. Yes, it's a tough sport. Yes, there's the negative aspects I mentioned in the first video. But I personally would not be constantly watching fights, hell, getting involved in a fight, and planning to do so again, if there were not compelling aspects to the sport, because they're very clear they are. Okay, thank you for watching. By the way, if you have any questions, as someone who's maybe very recently got interested in the sport, if you have questions as to why I follow it so much, or anything specific, I'll be happy to answer, as long as it's respectful. Oh, one more thing. It allows people to be themselves in those square meters in a way that they might not be able to express themselves elsewhere. It's not about violence. It's about sort of asserting controlled aggression and courage and pent up energy. Basically, you have to do it to know what it's like. By the way, one thing for guys, a lot of women respect men who enter the ring. Something I've noticed. Not trying to be bravado or anything like that, but yeah. I mean, boxing actually has quite a large number of female followers. Obviously there are women fighters, that's true, and I completely support that, but there is a lot of women watch men's boxing, and I suspect there's certain reasons for that, but we'll go into that in this video. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.